Hey, what is up, guys? This is Larry with the Financial Lift, and today I want to talk about the executive orders that Trump just recently signed and why personally I believe that none of this really matters. I think there's a lot of people out there creating videos, kind of going in depth about these executive orders, which is great. The more information, the better. But I also kind of believe that, a lot of people have to have an understanding that it's just an executive order that's been signed. It's not necessarily being executed right now, and there's a big difference. The analogy I would kind of give is just think about a company or school giving a policy about, if you're late, you're going to get in trouble. But there's a difference between having a policy written versus it actually being executed, and being enforced. So that's definitely one major difference that I think people have to really keep in mind, is that the executive order has just been signed, just not necessarily being executed. And I kind of personally, I believe, this is just my opinion, but I believe it's going to be a tough time executing that actual order. But before I go to any further, if you aren't aware of the 4 executive orders I'm talking about, there's plenty of videos out there going into detail, but I'll just kind of briefly explain them. The first is the student debt deferment as far as paying those payments. And that's something we already currently have, but it's set to expire fairly soon. So that's something that Trump has signed an executive order for. The second basically has to deal with renters and evictions and basically finding additional funding to help out these renters that may be evicted down the road. The third has to deal with unemployment benefits, which is going to be paid out of $400 additional per week versus the $600 that has already expired. And once again, I don't necessarily believe any of this is going to matter or pass. I will do separate videos if it does, seem like it's actually gaining momentum. But right now, like I said, they're just executive orders that have been signed. The Democrats have already acknowledged that they're going to challenge these executive orders. So I don't necessarily think it's going to go too far. And the fourth has to deal with this payroll tax deferment, which once again, I don't necessarily think is going to go anywhere. And even if it does, I don't think it's going to really matter too much. And I'll at least touch on this one a little bit more. Basically, this payroll tax deferment just allows employers to not necessarily withhold some of your earnings, so that way you're saving more of that paycheck, and it's not necessarily being applied to Social Security and so forth. It's just a deferment, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you're off the hook for owing that amount. So come at the end of the year, once this deferment expires, you will still be on the hook for that amount. That's at least that's the way it's currently written. I think there's a lot of people out there, especially the people that are certain that these executive orders are going to amount to much, that instead of a deferment, at some point down the road, Congress or just somehow there's going to be an actual waiver for the payroll tax, because in their minds they just believe that, Congress or everybody out there, there's no way they're going to allow us to accumulate this amount that we're going to have to owe and pay it on one lump sum. But the way I would challenge that is we already had that same problem with renters. Renters weren't necessarily being evicted, but they're still on the hook for the amount that they had to pay in rent. And so I think that same problem is going to happen as far as this deferment for the payroll tax. There was no perfect solution offered for renters as far as you don't necessarily have to pay rent for a couple of months, but at the end of it, you're going to have to somehow come up with this money, which doesn't really make sense, because if you're not able to pay it month by month, how are you going to all of a sudden be able to afford a big lump sum at the end of it? And yet, once again, there's no perfect solution offered. So I don't necessarily see why so many people are hopeful that there's going to be a waiver offered for this payroll tax deferment. But the whole purpose of this video is to kind of talk about that I don't necessarily think everyone should be too hopeful that this executive order is going to go anywhere. I think it has this big ring when everyone hears, executive order has been signed, so they think it has to go somewhere. But not to get too political or anything here, but Trump has already proven that he uses executive orders in ways that he knows are going to be challenged in the court and going to be held up, or at least, and potentially even overturned. We saw that with travel bans and so forth, a couple of years ago. So I don't necessarily see why this would be any different. He's obviously very aware that this executive order is going to cause, big headlines. He's also aware that it's going to make Democrats look bad whenever they try to challenge it, because he can easily say that, look, Democrats are the ones that are holding up the funding, and, America's suffering. And once again, this is not to get political. I really don't care who you vote for. The whole point I want to make is that it's very evident that it's just used as a political, chess move. And another big problem as far as these executive orders is that they're all contingent on the fact that the funding is coming from the leftover funding from the previous stimulus packages that have been passed. So I definitely think that's going to be a challenge, because when you don't have the funding directly available, it makes it that much harder to execute any type of executive order. So like I said, I just wanted to make this brief video because I felt there was a little too many people out there kind of giving too much false hope as far as these executive orders amounting to much. And that's not to say we can't be optimistic and can't be hopeful that it will amount to much. I really hope that it does. But I do think it is important to acknowledge that, there's a lot of political games at play right now, especially because it's a political season. So, there's going to be, everybody's just trying to grab those headlines as far as, stimulus package being passed or, unemployment benefits being extended. But I don't necessarily think we should be focused on the headlines. I think we should be focusing on the proof. But as far as counting on these executive orders amounting to much in your own personal life, I think it's probably a better move to focus more on your own personal life as far as things you can actually control right now, and kind of wait until we actually see more proof and concrete evidence that these executive orders actually amount to anything. So that's it for this video. I just wanted to give a quick update. And if you appreciated this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like personal finance, business, economics, or anything like that, please hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more.